quiz review, parallel and perpendicular lines, and what we're doing here is we are writing equations of a line given a line that is parallel or perpendicular. And just as we did for our last section and our last quiz of just writing equations of lines, we're pretty much going to follow the same 3 steps that we followed before of first trying to identify the slope, second finding the intercept, and then the y-intercept. And then once we have the slope and the y-intercept, we can plug it into slope-intercept form. So I'm just going to jump right in here. And here we go. So the first set of questions says we need to be able to identify just the slope of a line parallel to the line given. And so just finding the slope, it'll be a pretty straightforward process. So identifying the slope of a line parallel, if you see parallel, I think it's always a good idea to mark that, and then we need to remember that the slope of parallel lines is the same. So if I'm identifying the slope of a line parallel to the line given, I'm really just identifying the slope of the line. So if we look at number 1, it says 4 minus y equals 3x. In order to find the slope of this line, I need to put it in slope-intercept form, which means that I need to solve for y, or get the y by itself. So what I'm going to do first is just move this 4 out of the way, and then I'm left with a negative y equals 3x minus 4. And then in order to get rid of that negative, I can either multiply or divide everything by negative 1. I'm just going to multiply to save space. So what happens when I multiply everything by a negative 1 or divide everything by a negative 1 is I just am flipping the sign of everything. So what happens is this becomes y equals negative 3x plus 4. And so now I can see that my slope is negative 3. So I'm going to write m equals negative 3. So if the slope of this line is negative 3, that means that the slope of any parallel line is also negative 3. So moving on to the next one, number 2 is 4x plus 2y equals 6. Once again, I need to get this in slope-intercept form, meaning I need to get the y by itself. So I'm going to move the 4x to the other side by subtraction. I'm left with 2y equals negative 4x plus 6. I'm going to divide everything by 2 to get rid of that 2 over here. And I'm left with y equals, some of us have been struggling with this kind of stuff, so I'll just slow down a little bit. I've got a negative 4 divided by a 2, positive 2, so that gives me a negative 2, keep the x. And then here I have 6 divided by 2. 6 divided by 2 is a positive 3. So now that this is in slope-intercept form, I can pretty easily see that my slope is negative 2. So the slope of any parallel line is also going to be negative 2. All right, moving on to number 3. This is y equals negative 4. Now before I try to move things around, which I really can't because y is already by itself, I want to recognize that this is a horizontal line. If you remember the funny little word thing I taught you, we have hoi vux, where hoi stands for horizontal line, has a 0 slope, and the equation of the line is y equals. And so if I'm trying to figure out the slope is, I can remember this, that the slope is actually 0. So the slope of any line parallel to this is also going to be 0, and it's also going to be horizontal because horizontal lines are parallel to each other. So the slope here is 0. All right, looking at number 4. I have y plus 5x equals negative 1. And so to get the y by itself, I'm just going to move the 5x to the other side. So I'm left with y equals negative 5x minus 1. So now I can see that the negative 5 is the slope. So that's how you do those first ones. We are just finding the slope of the line, and so the slope of any parallel line will be exactly the same. So the next section says, determine whether the graphs of the following equations are parallel or perpendicular. So the thing that we need to remember here is that lines are parallel if they have the same slope, which is what we just were working on. Lines are perpendicular if they have an opposite reciprocal slope. So opposite reciprocal means that the sign is opposite, so positive or negative. is what I mean by opposite, and then the fraction is flipped. So a over b would turn into b over a. And then parallel, as we just said, it means it has the same slope. So I'm going to find the slope of these two lines and then see, is it the same or are they opposite reciprocals? And then I should be able to answer the question. So first step, just like we did above, is to make sure they're in slope-intercept form so I know what the slope is. For this one, it's already in slope-intercept. Y equals mx plus b, where 2/3 is the slope, so I don't really need to do anything there. Over here, though, the y is not by itself, so I'm going to move the 2x to the other side. I'm left with negative 3y equals negative 2x plus 8. In order to get rid of this 3, I'm going to divide everything by a negative 3. And I'm left with y equals, be careful here, negative 2 divided by a negative 3. Can't simplify because there's no common factors in terms of the numbers, but in terms of the sign, a negative divided by a negative becomes a positive 2 over 3 x. And then if we're looking over here at 8 divided by negative 3, 8 and 3 also don't have common factors, so I can't simplify those numbers, but a positive divided by a negative is just a negative 8 over 3. So if I look, the slope of this equation is 2/3. The slope of the first one was 2/3, so these lines have the same slope, so they are parallel. Okay, so moving on to number 6, I'm going to use the same strategy, find the slope of each line and see if they're the same or if they're opposite reciprocals, and then I can answer the question. So this first one's already in slope-intercept form, y equals mx plus b. There is no plus b, that means that the intercept is 0, but the slope is 4. So if I get a slope of 4 over here, then they're the same, but if I get a slope of negative 1/4, then they're perpendicular. So this one's not yet in slope-intercept form, so I'm going to move the x to the other side. And I'm going to get rid of this 4 by dividing everything by 4. I'm left with y equals, now be careful here, this is like a negative 1. So this is like a negative 1 divided by 4, which is negative 1/4 x. And then here we just have 12 divided by 4, which is a positive 3. So now I can see that my slope here is negative 1/4. So a slope of 4 and negative 1/4 are opposite sign and reciprocals, because this is like 4 over 1, so 1 over 4 is the reciprocal. So these lines are actually perpendicular. All right. So we're moving on to the next section. It says, write an equation in slope-intercept form for the line that passes through the given point and is parallel to the graph of the given equation. So essentially I'm giving you an equation and I'm giving you a point. So this is where we go back to our 3-step process. You're going to use the equation to find the slope, and since these lines are parallel, you're going to use that slope because the slope of a parallel line is the same. The equation is not the same because parallel lines have different intercepts. They have the same slope, but they have different intercepts. So then we're going to use the slope in the x and the y to solve for b. We're going to plug that in, solve for b, and then we should be able to write our new equation. So I'm going to walk through this for each of these. On number 7, we're going to start with the equation, step 1, and I like to label these, especially if you're someone who's had trouble following these steps. Go ahead and label them to make sure you're following all the steps. Step 1 is find the slope. They're parallel lines, so if I find the slope of this equation, I know the slope of my new equation. So it's already in slope-intercept form, y equals mx plus b, where m is negative 4. So m equals negative 4. They have the same slope because they're parallel lines. I'll switch colors and go to step 2. For step 2, I'm going to use the slope, which is negative 4, and I'm going to use these points, x and y, in order to solve for b. I'm going to plug them into the equation, y equals mx plus b, and I'm going to solve for b. So what do I plug in for y? I plug in 5 equals m is negative 4 I plug in -2 for x plus b, and now I just solve for b. So 5 equals -4 times -2 is a positive 8 plus b. Subtract 8 from both sides, and I get b equals 5 minus 8 is -3. So b is -3. So now you can see that I have m is -4, b is -3. So that is all I need to be able to plug into the equation of a line. Use yellow here. My equation is step 3. Whoops. Y equals m is -4, x plus b, which it's a -3, so I'll just say -3. And that is my equation of the line for that one. All right, number 8, going to do the same thing, starting off with slope. This equation is already in slope-intercept form, where my slope is -3/4, so the slope of my new line is also -3/4. Done with that step. Moving on to find the intercept. I cannot just use this intercept. That's the intercept of this line. I'm finding the intercept of a line that is parallel. So I'm going to use this slope and this coordinate in order to find my new intercept. So I'm going to plug it into y equals mx plus b, where y is -6, m is -3/4, x is 4, plus b. Now I just solve. -6 equals -3/4 times 4. What happens is this is like 4/1, and so these 4's actually cancel. You could check that by plugging it into a calculator, but I'm left actually just with -3. So it equals -3 plus b. To get b by itself, I'm going to add that 3 to both sides. So I have b equals -6 plus 3, which is -3. So now I have m is -3/4, b is -3. I'm going to plug those in to my equation of a line, y equals mx plus b, where m is -3/4, x plus b, which is -3. So that is the equation of the line. So now I'm going to look at number 9, following the same steps again. This one, I want to pay attention. My equation is y equals 7. Obviously, that doesn't quite look like y equals mx plus b, so I want to stop and think, and I can realize that this is actually a horizontal line. If we think about Hoivux, where h is horizontal lines have a 0 slope, and the equation is y equals. So that tells me that the slope of this line and any parallel line is 0. So that answers my first question. The slope is 0. So moving on to my intercept, I'm still going to plug this in, but instead I'm going to plug in 0 for m, and then 12 for x, and 3 for y. So y equals mx plus b. I'm going to plug in 3 equals 0 times 12 plus b. 0 times 12 is just 0, so I'm left with 3 equals b. So I have slope of 0, 3 is my y-intercept, so my equation is y equals, m is 0, so 0 times anything is just 0, so it's going to be y equals 3. And actually, I could have figured this out just from the start, and some of you probably did that. I've told you more than once, I'm a step-by-step person, so I often do this. I do all the work, and then I realize, oh, I could have just skipped all this work. We know that all horizontal lines are parallel to each other, so I could have realized when I did this that any line parallel to y equals 7 would also be a parallel line, and meaning it would be y equals, so I just look up here for my y value. I could have known that it was y equals 3 from the first step, but I did all the steps and came to the same conclusion, so it's all right. And some of you might be step-by-step people too, so you might have needed to see those steps. But if you're one of those people who's able to just recognize things on the front end, good for you. You saved yourself 3 steps. So moving on to number 10, I'm going to do the same thing, finding slope first. My equation here is 2x plus y equals 5. I've got to be careful. This is not in slope-intercept form, so that's what I need to do first. I'm going to move the x to the other side, and I get y equals negative 2x plus 5. Now I can see that my slope is negative 2, so m equals negative 2. Moving on to find my intercept, I'm going to use x, y, and m. Plug it into y equals mx plus b, and I'm going to solve for b. So y is 1, m is negative 2, x is 3 plus b. So 1 equals negative 6 plus b. I'm going to add 6 to both sides, and I get b equals 7. So m is negative 2, b is 7. I'm going to plug those in. Y equals negative 2, x plus 7. All right, 2 more of this type. I'm going to follow the same steps again. These are getting a little trickier though because they're not in slope-intercept form, so we've got to work that out first. So here, I just need to divide everything by 3. So I get y equals 2 over 3. There's no negatives to simplify, so I'm just going to write 2 over 3x. And then over here, I have negative 3 divided by 3, which is negative 1. All right, now that it's in slope-intercept form, I can see that the slope is 2/3. So slope is 2 over 3. Now I'm going to use my slope and my coordinate to find b, which is my intercept. So y equals mx plus b. I'm going to plug in 4 for y. That's from this coordinate. 4 equals, my slope is 2/3, times x is negative 3 plus b. When I am multiplying these fractions, I multiply negative 3 times 2, which is negative 6, and then I divide by 3. So negative 6 divided by 3 is negative 2. So I get 4 equals negative 2 plus b. Add 2 to both sides, and I get b equals 6. So m is 2/3, b is 6. Plug this in. Step 3. Y equals 2/3 x plus 6. My b and my 6 look very similar, but that is a 6. All right, number 12. Step 1 is to identify the slope. I see another funky equation here. It's just x equals 1. So we have to remember hoi vux, where vux means vertical line, undefined slope, and the equation is x equals. So I'm not going to make the same mistake that I made on number 9 and do a bunch of work. I'm going to recognize right now that this is a vertical line. So any parallel line is also going to be vertical with an undefined slope. And so it's also going to have the equation x equals, so I can just stop right here and write x equals negative 8, because that's what x equals. And it doesn't matter what y is, a vertical line, x is always going to equal the same thing. So that's all I need to do there. Okay, this last one on this page says, find an equation of a line that has a y-intercept of negative 1 that is parallel to the graph of the line 3x plus 6y. So here we're finding the equation of line, and it's telling me my y-intercept is negative 1. So you might be confused for a second and think, oh, what is that? But a y-intercept is b. So I'm actually taking a step out of this. You don't have to solve for b because I'm telling you that b is negative 1. I'm also telling you that it's parallel, meaning the slope is the same. It's parallel to the graph of this. So all I have to do is find the slope, and then I can plug in the slope and the intercept, and I'm good. So the problem here is that it's not in slope-intercept form, so I need to solve for y. So first thing I'm going to do is move the 3x to the other side. I get 6y equals negative 3x plus 12, and I need to divide everything by 6. So I get y equals -3 divided by 6 is negative, they're both divisible by 3, so -1/2 x, and then 12 divided by 6 is 2, +2. So now I can see my slope is -1/2. I already gave you the intercept of -1, so we just plug this in. Y equals mx plus b. In this case, it's -1, so I'm just going to say -1, -1. Okay, so this is the first page of the quiz review, which is dealing with lines that are parallel, which is pretty straightforward. So now I'm going to move on to the next page, which deals with lines that are perpendicular.